lifting up Jesus, opening his word from Australia, Denmark, Israel, Japan, New Zealand, Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, Singapore, South Africa, United Kingdom, Thailand, the Philippines, United States, and throughout the world. You're watching Moriel TV.
Okay, let's understand the general context. Jesus, elsewhere in Matthew's Gospel, earlier in chapter 12, identifies his brethren, as it were, as the one or the ones who do the will of his Father. Those are his brethren. There are those who have suggested, or who have tried to suggest, that it talks about, in a primary sense, blessing Israel, blessing the Jewish people, that is his ethnic brethren, the Jews. There are those who've tried to suggest that. However, Matthew 12:48, he makes it clear. The one who's telling him said, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Stretching out his hand towards his disciples, he said, "Behold my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father who's in heaven, he is my brother and sister and mother." Hence, within the context of the same gospel, Jesus identifies his brothers as those who do the will of his Father. Those who try to apply this exclusively to Jewish people, or to the Jewish nation, or even to unbelieving Israel, are quite mistaken. This is not to deny that the Lord has a special love for Israel, and has a prophetic purpose, and a salvation purpose, even for unbelieving Israel. Prophetically, he certainly does. And the Lord will indeed bless those who bless Israel. That is absolutely true, based on the Abrahamic covenant of promise. Nonetheless, that's not what it's talking about in the context of the Olivet Discourse. He's talking about believers. But when we look at what he's stating about being in prison in the overall framework of the Olivet Discourse, we have to go back to chapter 24, bearing in mind chapter 24 and 25 of the Olivet Discourse. He's speaking of those who are in prison for their faith specifically. Now, this is not to say we should not be concerned for those who are in prison, and for prison ministries and prison fellowships and evangelistic ministries in prisons. That's something else. But in the specific end times prophetic context of which Jesus is speaking in Matthew 25, he is talking about our obligation to stand with and support those believers who are being persecuted for their faith in Islamic countries, in China, communist countries, and so forth. That is what he's mainly talking about. You can apply it in other ways. You can apply it to Israel, but within the context, that is not mainly what it's speaking of. It is mainly speaking of our brethren who are in prison for their faith, who are those who are being persecuted in the last days, as he speaks of in the previous chapter. Bearing in mind, there's no division in the original canon between chapter 24 and 25 in Matthew. Hence, his brothers are other believers, and those in prison are those who are in prison for their faith, with a specific or particular emphasis on the last days. Now, having said that, there is still much to be said about prison ministry. Many people, unsaved people, will get saved in prisons. Unfortunately, the prison ministry has tended to be ecumenical. Satan corrupted prison ministry through the late Chuck Colson, who sold it down the river to Roman Catholicism and ecumenism, handed it over, the leadership of his ministry, over to a Roman Catholic. Prison ministry was greatly undermined by Satan, working through the late Chuck Colson, who was a man who did tremendous harm to the cause of Christ. Nonetheless, there are valid prison ministries that are not ecumenical. Many people do get saved in prison, but those are not the brothers Jesus is talking about. We evangelize people in prison so they will become our brothers. Nonetheless, let's continue. The Olivet Discourse has to be understood as a continual unit. and it has to be understood within the overall context and framework of Matthew's gospel. Thus we know who his brothers are, who he's referring to, and thus we understand what he specifically means about those who are in prison. My name is Jacob Prasch. God bless and thank you so much for listening.